Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next instalment of the Dare Dallas webinar. And continuing our theme today on £5,000 spends, I'm very pleased to be with my very good friend, Jenny Knott. So good morning, Jenny. Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you, Alastair.
Good. Now, Jenny, we all know, and we've discussed your love of silver and jewellery before, but obviously one of the other things that, well, part of the silver thing that you're really interested in is the modern aspect of it. And as part of your £5,000 spend article, you spoke in depth a little bit about the silver makers that you really admire. So what more can you tell us about those?
Well, part of my article, I really wanted to point out that that if we don't support modern silversmiths, then we're going to have a dead industry. And I am massively supportive of the craft in general. I mean, I love silver, as you know. One of the things I love about silver, it is both practical and it is beautiful. I think the modern silversmiths absolutely take all the skill, all the technology that we have at our disposal today, all the skills of their ancestors, and they bring this together in widely different, huge variations of pieces. So actually, if you think about late 18th century silver, you know, if I said that to you, you'd be imagining something neoclassical, bright cut. There's a genre. I mean, one of the glories of modern silversmithing is there's no such thing as an absolute genre. You might get a sense that it's modern, but it's the variations are so wide, and there's a huge tribute paid to the metal that people are working in. And you and I know from work that we've done together recently, some of the biggest supporters of modern silversmiths are the institutions of our country. So the livery halls are absolutely fantastic at commissioning modern silver.
And we've seen some tremendous pieces, but sat alongside some of the most historically important pieces of silver in the country. And they work together, don't they? They
work together absolutely brilliantly. And one of the things that I bang on about interminably is that you can mix things up. And not only can you mix things up, it's delightful to mix things up. So you might not want to have your table set like a Victorian dinner party with loads of cut glass and silver, but you could have an amazing centerpiece of some sort. You could have candlesticks, but you don't need to have candlesticks. You could have a lot of I think in my article we illustrated a lot of bowls, and you could have a bowl with your chocolate sitting in it. It doesn't, I mean, the 5K spend was a wonderful concept. Here we go. I mean, how beautiful is that? Simple, beautiful, gilded in the center. So actually, people are going to draw breath, but you could even put your salted peanuts in there as long as they didn't live in there for too long. So the gilding inside the bowl stops the silver being corroded by the salt in salty treats. So as long as you didn't allow your peanuts or your cashews or what have you to sit in there, they could stay in there. But for me, that is absolutely the epitome of something that's beautiful and something that's practical. And I am quite a sort of not a trailblazer, but it's so important to think about our modern silversmiths. You don't even have to spend 5K. I mean, the truth of the matter is, again, we have discussed, silver is more expensive now than it was, very much more expensive than it was 20 years ago, but it's still not outrageously expensive. And I sometimes think we don't pay enough attention to what is being produced, and it's vital that we do, otherwise we won't have an industry.
I mean, the thing for me with modern silver is the fact that the designers have got so much freedom as to what they're going to design. You know, they can incorporate different vintage or antique elements to it. However, you've got this lovely kind of aspect. And as you say, yes, I appreciate that it's a little bit more expensive than it used to be. However, if you went to go and buy a bespoke diamond ring, for example, you're not even on a similar ballpark, you know, to what it would cost to get something made of silver. And I think actually to have something bespoke made, because generally speaking, you can go and buy these things off the shelf and there are big things there. But silversmiths are really accommodating and happy to work with you on certain aspects of design, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely they are. And I think my jewellery colleagues will probably want to have something to say if they listen to this webinar, but there is something generic about a diamond ring. It may not be generic in its setting. I fear the I fear the flood of disapproval, but individual craftsmen working away. As you say, they are very accommodating. I mean, they often work to commissions. One of the joys about silver, if you imagine a piece of silver, most people might think silver's shiny, but of course it can be planished, so spot hammered. It can be matte, it can be engraved, it can be chased, and which, you know, pushing it out from one side to the other. It's incredibly versatile, and silversmiths, by and large, will be they will be very happy to accommodate you within the kind of genre of material of style that they use, but also, you often, as with other craftspeople, very happy for you to visit them in their studios, to see what's done, to have a conversation about what it is you're after. And that, for people that I speak to, is all part of the process. It's part of the fun of buying something, is knowing where it came from. There's a modern silversmith called Rahuni Higson, whose name is of Finnish origin, and she works in the foothills of Snowdon. I mean, and takes inspiration from the mountains. So the whole package for me is it's a package
Absolutely.
of joy, really. Yeah,
no, absolutely. They are really true artisans of their craft, aren't they?
Yeah.
Just have another look at this one, and this is obviously another person that you've mentioned in your article. What can you tell us about this?
Well, this is Gerard Benny, and it's very identifiable. I mean, I think anyone who has anything to do with sort of mid-century silver would recognise that sort of textured finish, bark work. And I use that because there were a genre of English or British silversmiths, the Stuart Devlins, Gerard Benny, who never completely fell out of favour, but as so often happens, they were working in the sort of late 50s, early 60s, slightly became less popular in the 80s and 90s. And there's a real resurgence of interest in mid-century silver, as there is indeed, you'll tell me this, in mid-century furniture.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, mid-century furniture is certainly more popular than 18th and 19th century furniture at the moment, which is in certain aspects probably the same with silver.
It certainly, it absolutely is with silver. Funny enough, I as a teenager growing up, I was mortified that my parents had Urkel furniture when everybody else's parents seemed to have very fancy, huge Victorian dining tables. And it turns out that they've played the long game and they're spot on trend now.
I was going to say, I think you'd be quite impressed now, but alas.
Yeah. But I picked Gerard this because, you know, maybe if you follow silversmithing, there's a slight look of the 60s about it, but that's no longer a bad thing. But it's absolutely wonderful. Look at the texture. And again, we've got an object that's useful. It's a bowl, it's with a ladle, again, gilded interior. I mean, people are shopping and they want to use, they're going to want it by something that they can use. Look for a gilded interior, look for a glass liner, because that will help you out enormously, and you won't get silver corroding. The other person, of course, that we do have to mention is, I will say it in both of my best accents, George Jensen, as we would say in a highly anglicised accent, or Georg Jensen. Still, I mean, the shop on Bond Street is, if you've been there, a hugely popular destination. Those styles from both in silver and jewellery. I mean, you see, the other day, 2 or 3 days ago, I saw a little Georg Jensen baby bird pendant. These were made at the end of the 1930s, and it still looks completely spot on and contemporary. And it takes us to the idea that fabulous design is always fabulous, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing with Georg Jensen is that there is a certain aspect of his commercial arm, or obviously not his, but the brand's commercial arm, and the modern items that people automatically associate with him. And while some of the contemporary stuff is great, a lot of the contemporary stuff, to my eye, isn't that appealing. But their silver work, particularly, even more so than their jewellery, is certainly timeless. I mean, some of the stuff that you can buy now, and it's not horrendously expensive, because you are paying for something that is more of a manufactured item than a bespoke item. So you can buy these things quite cheaply.
You're absolutely right. You can buy these things inexpensively. I mean, the other company to mention in this regard is Tiffany. So there is a lot that is generic. There's a lot that, you know, you could buy a Tiffany money clip, for example, and it'll be stamped Tiffany, and it looks a whole lot like any other money clip. But nonetheless, in fact, very apposite, because Elsa Peretti died in the summer, but they've employed leading designers, you know, and it's a massive, the word iconic is one of my bugbears for something that is a massively overused word, but there are some iconic designs by individuals, and Elsa Peretti being one of them.
Absolutely. Now, to round this conversation off, Jenny, where would you go if you were looking at buying something particularly interesting and bespoke? Where would you go? I mean, we've mentioned before Goldsmiths Hall, haven't we?
Well, the Goldsmiths Hall is absolutely fantastic. Oh gosh, there we go. Goldsmiths Fair for next year. This is the Goldsmiths Hall. The Goldsmiths are very, very well funded, and they take enormously seriously their heritage, but also an obligation to foster and encourage modern silversmiths and goldsmiths. And the Goldsmiths Fair is an absolutely extraordinary occasion, and made even more so, of course, by the pandemic, because the 2020 fair couldn't take place. So, you know, our friend Google is always great to find people you might want to visit individually. The Goldsmiths Fair is an absolute melting pot of top contemporary talent. And when I say contemporary talent, they are looking for silversmiths and goldsmiths just out of college. So they're not necessarily looking for people. They also have very well established silversmiths and goldsmiths, but they are fantastic at talent spotting in young craftspeople. And that, for me, if you are in or around London, is an absolute must. And it is just fantastic. You will see eye-wateringly inspiring objects. But of course, you could literally go and look on the Goldsmiths Fair page and then just Google anything that appeals. I mean, I talked about Adrian Hope, but quite a lot of Scottish silversmiths. You don't have to think you've got to be, you know, London-centric in any way. A lot of these silversmiths are working, you know, quite a lot of them take inspiration from beautiful places, so all over the country, and more often than not, they'd be very happy for you to visit them in their studios. So, but as a starting point, you couldn't do better than starting on the at the Goldsmiths Fair, but just go to the Goldsmiths Hall and look at who they support and take it from there. That's what I would do.
And you could be, you know, investing in one of the stars of silver in the future. You
could be, and it would be such a great feeling, wouldn't it? I mean, this is what old patrons did in bygone days, and we are not necessarily great patrons, but it's an all-round feel-good experience, starting perhaps with the idea that you will have something that gives you pleasure and is beautiful. You may use it. You're supporting a craft that has been in existence for literally thousands of years. Yeah. And we wouldn't, you know, if your bag is 18th century silver, that's fantastic. Mine is, but we wouldn't have that had people hundreds of years ago not done what I'm encouraging people to do today, which is to support the craft ongoingly. Absolutely. Well, Jenny, thank you ever so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure to see you. Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Alastair. No doubt. We will see you again soon for another webinar. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us today, and a pleasure as always. Please do get in touch if you have any other subjects that you'd like us to talk about on the webinars, or drop us a line and follow us on LinkedIn. So many thanks. Bye-bye now.